And Japan sounding out South Korea to set up an alternative Quad grouping when they meet with Australia and New Zealand on the sidelines of next week's NATO summit.
And Professor Leszek Buszynski from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at Australian National University joins us live from Canberra. Professor, if you were asked to pick out 4 countries which on security policy on areas like Ukraine and China are relatively well aligned consistently and openly with big NATO players such as the US, you would likely as not pick Australia, Japan, South Korea and New Zealand. So the fact that they are invited to the NATO summit as observers and are now also, we're told, likely to meet on the sidelines, whether as Quad 2 or whether there's anything more informal, that should not surprise.
Right, you're right. I think there are other countries besides those 4 that are very concerned about developments in the Ukraine and in the Indo-Pacific. But the key issue here is how Japan and Korea can come together, how they can improve their relationship. Now, the Japanese have been very much alarmed by events in the Ukraine because this could lead to, may trigger or may encourage China to take a similar action in relation to Taiwan or the South China Sea, and that would be very disturbing for Japan. So this is a way of enticing Korea into the Quad or into some kind of relationship with the Quad, because the new president in Korea, Yoon Suk-yeol, indicated that he would be interested. But this is can be a controversial issue in Korean politics because Korea is more sensitive to China's reaction than is Japan. And the Koreans have to be very careful about moving ahead with the Quad. And I'm sure that the new president will be too. So there are all kinds of other issues here and I don't think you can call this an alternative to the Quad. It can be regarded as supplementary, as in terms of creating associate relationships attached to the Quad. Not only Korea, but sometime in the future, perhaps Vietnam as well, because there are very good reasons why Vietnam would be interested in an associate relationship with the Quad.
But Professor Buszynski, if I could cut in here, if it is meant to be supplementary, then I presume it would have to fix the perceived faults or failings that the Quad currently suffers from. So, for example, Quad skeptics will say there is insufficient lack of unity within the grouping. So, for example, we saw in their meeting last month where they did not come out with a very strong joint statement on Russian action in Ukraine, but individually they did. Presumably they were held back by one member being more careful of relations with Russia. Now, if Quad already has this kind of issues, any supplementary grouping, how is this grouping going to be fixing problems that we're already seeing in the Quad original grouping?
Well, the Quad original grouping includes India, and you're referring to India. India doesn't want to disturb its relationship with Russia, and so India has been very concerned about Russian reactions. Now, this group can be whatever happens on the sidelines of the Madrid NATO meeting, but it's likely to be a discussion meeting. It's likely to bring together these 4 countries. New Zealand, I must add, is likely to be somewhat of an outsider because New Zealand is really not less concerned about these issues. It's somewhat isolated from these issues. So really, we're looking at 3 countries here. And the other factor to take into account that the effectiveness of the Quad really depends upon the United States' presence. The United States has the resources and has the military presence throughout the Indo-Pacific to give the notion of the Quad some effectiveness and efficacy. So that's why I stress that whatever the meeting they come up with, whatever they'll do in that, whatever they'll discuss in that meeting, they can't go much further than the US will be willing to accept. So that's the key point. Now, the other point I want to stress here is that these three, not so much New Zealand, but these three are all allies of the United States. And so in that way, it's a meeting or it's a supplementary grouping that will have the blessing of the United States. And it's important to note that.
Thanks so much for all that, Professor Leszek Buszynski from the Strategic and Defence Studies Centre at the Australian National University. Thanks so much.